Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Today, we're going to talk about healthy communication. Very excited you're all here. We're going to start off with a quote. The hearing that is only in the ears is one thing. The hearing of the understanding is another. But the hearing of the spirit is not limited to any one faculty, to the ear or to the mind. Hence, it demands the emptiness of all the faculties. And when the faculties are empty, then the whole being listens. There is then a direct grasp of what is right there before you that can never be heard with the ear or understood with the mind. That's from Chinese philosopher Chuang Tzu. So that is going to be very important to us today, this idea of empathy, and that we're going into conversations ready with our ears open, our minds open, our whole selves open to hear what the other person has to say. Because a lot of times when we go into conversations, we're bringing in with us years of prior conversations. We might have implicit biases. We might have past conversations with this person that have gone poorly. We have our own judgments, our own experiences. And when we bring those into those conversations, it can actually impede communication. But when we're able to really listen to what they're saying, then it allows us to grow with them. And it allows us to create an opportunity to express what we're feeling in more open ways and to really understand what they're trying to say. So today we're going to talk, our agenda today is, what is the purpose of communication? Communication styles, communicating needs and emotions, and de-escalating tough conversations. So the purpose of communication is a few things. First is to form a connection with people. Connection really is fundamental to who we are as human beings. We all need to have connections with other people, and we can't do that without communication. The other purpose of communication is to share your feelings and your needs. In fact, if you look at most things people say, you can find a feeling or a need in there, and we're going to work on how to identify those today. And then also, the ultimate goal of communication is creating a world where everyone's needs are met. At least in my opinion, that's what the ultimate goal should be. But because if we're able to get out there what we need, and if we're listening with our empathetic ears and our empathetic hearts, then that allows us to engage in the first step of meeting people's needs and of listening to people and hearing what they're hoping to accomplish and what they're hoping to gain. So I'm sure everyone here has seen this chart before, the communication styles chart. On one side, we have passive, across from that aggressive, and then above that passive aggressive, and finally assertive. So passive communication style is when people are unwilling to, or when people are nervous when they don't fully express their needs, or when they back off really quickly, and they let other people sort of trample around them, or they just don't express themselves in the first place. And when that's the case, what tends to be the result is I lose, but you win. And that's, of course, not great for the person communicating. The other one is aggressive, and that's on the opposite end. And that looks like very forceful communication with the intention of getting your needs met at the expense of the other person's emotional safety and at the expense of their needs. And the other one is passive aggressive. And that's when when you're trying to express your needs and you're trying to express your feelings, but not directly. And so you do it in a sort of roundabout way that's confusing for both the person you're talking to and is not an effective way of getting your needs across. And so in that case, a lot of times both people lose and no one really gets their needs met. And finally, there's assertive communication. And that looks like clearly stating what you want and not backing down and not over asserting yourself, or not being overly aggressive at the expense of the other person's. And a lot of times in that case, it can open up a scenario where both people win. So as we all know about those, but let's talk more about how we develop our communication styles. So what factors contribute to the development of communication styles? And I think that's something that I'm sure that's something you as service providers have given a lot of thought to, especially if you're working with vulnerable populations. What are really common communication styles that you've noticed with the populations you've worked in? And what factors do you think have contributed them to developing that? If you want to put that in the chat. Yeah, someone says the way our families talk to each other really sets the tone for our communication styles. And someone else says that they experience a lot of passive aggressivity. And of course, not just with people who work with, but other people in your life as well. And usually and the person who said passive aggressive says, usually that is based on past trauma. That's really interesting. Does anyone want to expand on what that might mean and how past trauma can lead to our communication styles? Olivia and Chris can chime in too, of course. Yeah, someone says the invalidations of feelings and childhood trauma. Yeah, so trauma can have a huge effect on that, especially if you can imagine being a kid who is surrounded by people with very aggressive communication styles. And when they express their needs, they might be met with a lot of resistance. They might be met with anger and an unsafe environment. That might lead them to become very passive, and it might lead them to having a lot of anxiety around expressing their needs, and maybe even a feeling of, if I try to express my needs, I'm just going to get hurt, or I'm going to experience a lot of backlash. And that can happen too in relationships, where if a partner responds very harshly, very dangerously to expressing your needs, you might become passive in that relationship. I'm going to look through the chat really fast. Someone says a fear of abandonment often means people can't ask for what they want because of risk, and having trust issues may inhibit communication. Oh yeah. And then someone says competing for talk time and feeling as if only yelling or being aggressive is the only way of obtaining that talk time. I really like that. That can look into how people develop aggressive communication styles, because if they're having to fight to get their needs met, which is a lot of times what we're communicating, then that can lead them to have to communicate more aggressively, which might not always work in situations where they're working with more assertive or more passive people. That can come across as very harmful to them or very scary.
I think something else that's interesting, kind of in this vein, not necessarily in the trauma vein, but just in the way that I would say broader society kind of frames communication, is that, of course, assertiveness is definitely a huge goal, and that's what we all want to strive for. But I think sometimes people can mistake being aggressive for being assertive. And people can, say things like, well, I'm just, I'm really putting my foot down, like I'm making my voice heard and standing up for myself. And while those are all really great things to do, and so that you get your needs met, I think sometimes people forget that the whole other part of being assertive is also being kind and receptive and listening. And I think I definitely think that different parts of society and just different people privilege being assertive, which is great, but also can sometimes lean into more of that aggressive side as well. And so I think people sometimes strive for that and maybe sometimes miss the mark, like we all do sometimes, but I think that can happen as well.
And I think that hopping off of Olivia's point and then bringing it back to that trauma viewpoint as well. When you've lived in a house where the only viewpoint or the only voice that's heard is the aggressive style, then assertive doesn't make any sense, because the only thing that gets done is the aggressive style. So whether that's coming from somebody who has escaped the trauma that has been put upon them in a relationship, an IPV relationship, or potentially a child in a household with that communication style, they're going to leave that relationship or leave their current role, and in their next role potentially identify aggressive language and aggressive communication as the only actionable communication style to get something done, because they've never seen anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that combination of what we've talked about, of you learn it from other people, and you learn, like, by modeling it, and you also learn it as a response and using prior ways that you've gotten your needs met and bringing those into new conversations. So the reason why we're talking so much about this is because it ties into empathy. And anyone that we're coming to talk to in a conversation has all of this back history going into it of how they developed their communication style. And so if you're talking with somebody who's being very aggressive, it can be very easy to internalize it and say, oh, this person must be really mad at me. And if you're, or this person is just a mean person, or if they're a very passive person, it can be annoying. And you might be thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, just say what you're trying to say. What's the problem here? But there could be a lot going into that besides what you just meets the eye when you're talking to them. And so we're also, I realize I've spent way more time on the first two slides. Jamie says, I think that we can also learn communication styles from our parents as well and how they communicate with each other or others. Absolutely. That is absolutely a great way that we do learn those communication styles. So also give yourself some time to think, how can our body language portray a communication style? And how can we create a space for both ourselves and others to be more assertive when we're talking with them?
While thinking about this question, I did want to mention there was something in the chat. Laura Murillo mentions gender roles definitely play into that. And I think we were talking about the aggressive language style at the time, and it's 100% correct. Gender roles in society really dictate what's acceptable per side sometimes.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I also do want to say while we're here that it's not that everybody has one communication style. It's not like, well, I'm passive aggressive, so that is me and that is all I am. We tend to also have different communication styles depending on who we're talking to. I know for me, if I'm talking to someone who's really aggressive, I'm going to be like, okay, well, I'm going to be a lot more passive in response to that. Versus where if I'm with someone I'm really comfortable with, I might find myself being more aggressive than I normally would. And that's because it's a lot of times a response to a situation rather than like an innate part of who we are as human beings. And so I think that does lead us to a really great question that I do want to talk about is how can we create space for ourselves and others to be more assertive when we're talking with them? Anyone wants to even throw just a few words out in the chat? Setting boundaries. Yeah, it's really important.
While some other words are getting tossed out there, I think setting boundaries is an incredibly interesting response, and I think very, very on point. Because a lot of what happens with communication happens around communication as well. These boundaries that are socially set but aren't vocalized create a lot of hesitation or give more room to other individuals than they give to others. And if boundaries are clearly spoken and clearly communicated to the group around you, then everyone is on the same page. And when everyone's on the same page, then merits of conversation can come out and true personalities can really be part of the communication in a way that it might not be able to before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also see in the chat people saying ensuring everyone gets their chance to speak, coming back if someone's interrupted, and communicating benefits for both parties involved instead of just one benefiting, respecting everyone's time and voice. I love those. I love those a lot. And it's especially making sure that everyone's time and voice is valued. And, you know, especially when you're working in a group, maybe if you notice someone wants to say something or if someone gets cut off, really making sure that they get a chance to be heard. All right, we have spent forever on this slide because you are all great conversationalists. So we'll move on and talk about communicating our feelings and our needs. So what do people need? And a lot of times we immediately like food, water, shelter. Got it, nailed it. But there's also a lot of other things that we need. We need safety, love, respect, community, empathy, rest, alone time. That's an important one for a lot of people. And yeah, so those are some of our basic needs. And a lot of times these needs are being expressed when we communicate with people, whether we're aware of it or not. And so when our needs are not being met, it can actually trigger really difficult emotions. And in turn, those emotions can lead us to communicate in harmful or in ineffective ways. So let's explore some of these emotions. Wow, okay. I think I missed a slide there. Yeah, so it can lead us to communicate in harmful or in ineffective ways. And now we're going to talk about taking responsibility for our feelings. So I think I accidentally deleted that slide. So, you know, a lot of times it's easy, we find ourselves saying things like, they made me mad, or they made me this, or they made me that. But a lot of times what we're saying, they made me feel, is they did not meet, or they met a certain one of our needs. And then us having not had that need met caused us to feel a certain way. So I'm going to look at or read an example really quick. So your doctor is 10 minutes late for your appointment. You might be feeling anxious if you had another commitment that you're going to be late for. And you might be feeling annoyed if you get easily bored and waiting drives you crazy. You might be feeling relieved if you had an overwhelming day and you were hoping for some time for yourself. So in all these situations, the doctor's behavior was the same. It was the needs that were different. So your emotions in these situations are responses to your needs not being met, whether that be your need to get to your next appointment, that need to not be bored. I get bored very easily, so that's an important one for me. Or it might be your need to have some time to relax. And so if you came in and you said that doctor made me annoyed because he was late, then it's not necessarily that doctor doing it, it's your need not being met of having entertainment is what made you annoyed. So I don't know if anyone had any thoughts about that one or any questions at all. It's just an interesting way to think about things, and it gives us some space to like examine our feelings and take a step back and ask ourselves why we're having the emotions that we're having in response. So the next one is using empathy, which I love empathy, so I'm going to talk about it a bunch today. So oftentimes when people are communicating with us, it isn't really about us at all. They're telling you about them. You might have missed it in a song in the very beginning, but there's a song, when you're talking about me, you're really talking about you. And I can talk about you, but when I talk about you, I'm really talking about me. And there's a lot of truth in that. So when people are talking, they're a lot of times telling you about them, whether they're aware of it or not. If you think about how you can have the same conversation with 10 different people, you know, bring up the same things, and you're going to get 10 different responses. You're going to get 10 different ways that communication goes. And that's because they're bringing themselves into that conversation, and they're bringing their own insights. They're bringing their own perspectives into it. And so, yeah, as we said before, people entered into conversations with a day full of events and a lifetime of lessons from trauma. And sometimes people are projecting their own insecurities and frustrations onto you. And other times they come from a family or culture where they learn to communicate in a way that you don't understand or you might not find appropriate. But when you turn the focus from yourself to the other, it's easier not to react defensively or to take offense to what they're saying. You know, if somebody comes in and they're in a really bad mood and they're insulting you, it can be like, you know, of course that's rude and of course to take offense, but you know, it can help you prevent not getting your feelings hurt and not being very emotionally affected by it if you say, okay, what is going on with this person, instead of internalizing what they said to you and saying, is that really true about myself? Which could make you feel very defensive, or it can cause you to have really hurt feelings. So after you've had a conversation with somebody, and maybe they come to you and you're talking with them and you're listening to what they have to say, then you've identified their needs, you've identified their feelings and figured out what they're trying to tell you, then you can share yours. As that's a great chance to share yours as well, your feelings and your needs. People are much more likely to be cooperative when they feel like they've been heard and taken seriously. And they're also a lot more likely to find empathy for your situation as well. And so when it comes time to make a request, when it comes time to say, and this is especially when there's a conflict happening, like it is something that you hope to get from them or something that needs to be resolved. But when it comes time to make a request, explain how that request would help you be safe, happy, or valued, and ask what you can do to ensure that they receive similar benefits. And it's good to reassure them that you see them and that you care about their well-being, while also maintaining the importance of your well-being as well. And so before you go into a conversation, some good questions to ask yourself are, what are my intentions here? What am I hoping to accomplish? Sometimes we might not actually be aware of this. We might think, I want to talk about this, but we don't know why we want to talk about something. But is it because you're trying to win? Is it because you're trying to force someone into compliance? And with communication, you can go into communication with the intent of changing somebody's behavior, but the goal of communication is never to force somebody to do something that they don't want to do, especially in an equal relationship. You can also wonder, am I trying to shame the person or make them feel bad about themselves? Maybe they're engaging in behavior that you don't like they're not picking up after themselves, or they're not taking care of their responsibilities. Are you going into the conversation to get them to see how their behavior is harming you, or are you going into the conversation to make them feel bad about themselves, to make them feel ashamed of what they're doing? Or maybe you're going into the conversation because you want to heal a rift in the relationship, or to clarify a misunderstanding, or to share something that's hurting you. Another question to ask yourself is, am I in a good emotional and mental place to have this conversation? If you're feeling a lot of heated emotions, you're feeling very agitated or defensive, then it might be a good idea not to have that conversation right then. You might want to take a step back, take some deep breaths, and come back to having a conversation when you're feeling ready and when you're feeling like you're able to listen and you're able to empathize in that moment. So we're going to do some examples. I'm going to read a statement and I'm going to ask you to try to identify the need and the feeling behind the statement, and then come up with a response that you might give. So this one is, you always say that you want me to help out around the house, but whenever I try, you just criticize me and point out all my mistakes. Why should I even bother if I'm just going to do it wrong? So can anyone identify we'll start easy, the feeling that this speaker is feeling when they are making this statement? Yeah, they're feeling not good enough or undervalued, unappreciated.
I'll just add frustrated. They might be feeling like all the actions that they're doing are just meaningless. So frustration's part of it too.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely some frustration there. And what about what needs they're having that are going unmet? Yeah, it sounds like they want to help and they don't know how, someone said. Yes, the need to feel appreciated. And maybe the need to feel like what they're doing matters, and the need to have a safe environment where they can learn from their mistakes. And, maybe they didn't learn how to do housework well. And so they are making these mistakes, but they're genuine. And there needs to be some sort of safety for them, that they have room to make those mistakes without feeling on edge, like they're walking on eggshells. Yeah, they need openness and honesty and communication. And so if you were the person and who this was being said to, what is a way that you could respond that would acknowledge their feelings and their needs and address what might be a way to move forward in this situation?
So on my end, every time I try to formulate the response to this, it just gets deeper and deeper in my head. Like, what is the goal that we have as two people doing this work, helping around the house, and why am I criticizing and pointing out mistakes? Like, why is it so important to me it's done a certain way? If we can identify together things that we definitely want to have occur, what would be the best way to make sure that happens? What communication style would help in those situations? But I'm also having a little bit of a hard time, like, what would that sentence look like to a significant other?
Yeah, well, I'll give it a shot then, just as an example. So how about, I see that you're really frustrated, and I hear you saying, oh, actually, it looks like we got someone in the comments. Okay, let's try theirs first. It's probably going to be pretty good. I'm sorry, but I appreciate you taking the time to clean. Can we talk about how we can help each other clean? Yeah, that's good. As starting with apology, maybe you realize, like, oh, I guess I have been critical looking back at this. But so yeah, acknowledging their frustration, saying, hey, I see that you're really frustrated, and I'm hearing you saying that you feel really criticized and you feel like on edge about making mistakes. What are some ways that we can move forward from here that'll make you feel safe doing housework, and that can make sure that we're both equal participants in this household? And that would open up a conversation about that. And it would open up, because it would kind of diffuse their frustration of like, oh, okay, so you're hearing me, you're hearing my frustration, you're acknowledging that you have been critical of me and you're willing to work with me. And that would set up a good starting point. All right, let's look at another one. So this one's a little passive aggressive. Oh, so now it's okay to make major purchases without consulting each other. Is that it? Maybe I should just go buy a Porsche and take a trip to Italy. That's apparently fine, right? It's not like we have to pay rent or anything. So what are some underlying emotions that are going on in this? Frustration. Anger, financial stress, hurt.
I'm going to take a Donnie Darko moment, and it is very much on the fear side of the line. Yeah, lots of fear involved in that statement.
Yeah, absolutely. I watched 10 minutes of Donnie Darko and it freaked me out, so I can't agree there. But I definitely can see how a lot of fear is there. You know, it's coming across as anger, but underneath that is worry of, how are we going to pay rent this month? How are we going to solve this financial instinct? And maybe a little bit of betrayal too, of you're my partner. We're supposed to make these decisions together. And now, you know, you've made this without me, and we're both going to have to deal with the consequences here. And also someone says feeling like they're not on the first page. Yeah. Oh, on the same page. Yeah, they're being assertive about how they feel, or how they feel somewhat betrayed, and trying to be realistic about finances. So if you were the person saying this, if you were the person who was frustrated at your partner, what would be a way that you could say the same thing without coming across as passive aggressive and without coming across as accusatory? Yeah, I would really appreciated you talking with me before you made this purchase. We are a team and we should discuss these types of decisions.
Yeah, I would say also, like both of you have been saying, like being open and vulnerable about those feelings of worry, fear, hurt, even though those might be a little bit less easy to express immediately than like anger or betrayal. I think that those are really vulnerable feelings, and when you open up to someone and express that you're feeling that way, it's going to lead to a way more vulnerable conversation than a statement like this, which would probably put someone on the defensive, and then you're just kind of both going at each other with trying to come up with, you know, the better response or the last word or whatever it might be. And so I think digging into those harder feelings, even if they might be a little bit tougher, could definitely be a way to get a better conversation out of this.
Yeah, definitely. Because if I made a big purchase, I probably shouldn't have, and someone came and told me this, I would immediately start justifying that purchase. And I'd start coming up with excuses and being like, well, I tried to call you, but you weren't available, or, well, we needed it anyways. And, you know, the price or some form of excuse. Or I would start thinking of, well, what about the time you bought this? You know, that would be my immediate reactions in my head. I hope I wouldn't necessarily say that, but that's, you know, the gut feeling that comes to mind. But if somebody approached it and saying, hey, I'm feeling hurt that you didn't consult me with this, and I'm scared that this financial decision that you made without me is going to have negative impacts on our well-being and on our ability to afford our basic necessities, and like, I would like you to please consult me in the future. And maybe even I'd like you to apologize, or maybe we should return this thing and purchase it another time when we do have the financial means to. Yeah, so let's read some from the chat. Hey, so I saw that you bought something the other day, and I think we should talk about our financial situation. I'm concerned, and I think when buying large things, we should talk about it. If we talked about purchases beforehand, it would benefit us both because money has been tight and I'm concerned. Yeah, that's really good. It addresses both the feelings and the needs, and a way to move forward in the future. All right, we've got one more. So here's another one. You need to stop eating all that junk food or you're gonna have a heart attack. It's like you don't even care that you're poisoning yourself. So what is going on under this statement, feelings-wise? Fear and anger. definitely fear and anger. And concern too. That this person is worried about whoever they're talking to, because they're concerned about their health, and they're concerned that their decisions are going to lead to health problems that are going to harm them or lead to an early death. But the way that they're coming out and saying this is going to cause, it doesn't come across as if they're scared. It comes across as criticism, and it comes across as like a personal attack, and it may also make somebody feel defensive or feel bad about themselves. It's not always easy to change our eating habits. And yeah, someone says it comes across as judgmental and not concerning. And it doesn't acknowledge too that, there's more to it than, oh, I'm going to eat a lot of junk food. There could be a lot of emotional things involved. That person could be trying to eat healthier. And it doesn't take those factors into consideration. It just comes across as judgmental and a criticism, when it was intended to express concern and express even a form of love too, that I love you and I want you to be taking care of yourself. So what is a way that you could say this that would express those feelings of concern and care? I think we should both try to eat healthier and help each other so we can live a long, healthy life together. I'm concerned we're eating too much junk food. Yeah, I love that. And I love that it states that so we can live a long, healthy life together. It states the goal, like, this is what I want for us, and let's create actions that are going to take us there. All right. So here's a different kind of example of, those were some pretty aggressive communications, but let's look at a situation when you're working with someone who has a very passive form of communication. And so you spend a lot of time with your friend Skylar, but your partner seems to be uncomfortable whenever they're with them together. You notice your partner starts making excuses not to be around Skylar, and when you ask them what's going on, they claim it's nothing and change the subject. How can you open up a conversation to encourage your partner to be honest with you about the situation? Someone says, it seems like Skylar or something about Skylar is making you uncomfortable. I want to respect your feelings. Can you explain what's going on? Yeah, I really like that, because it states I have observed this in a non-judgmental way. And no, you're not saying you always act weird around this person, or what's your problem with them. Just observing, I can tell that something is making you uncomfortable, and stating, I want to respect your feelings. And so they know that when you're going into the conversation, you're not going into making accusations or going in to try to change their behavior, but that you are concerned about their feelings and what's going on with them. Right. Well, we're running short on time here, about 2:45. So really fast, before we end here, I want to talk about communicating with abusers. So these communication skills are great, but they only work when both parties are acting in good faith and are willing to empathize. Even if the person starts off mad and starts off upset, as long as they're willing to come around, oh, okay, I see your point. And as long as they're willing to make that empathy, make that compromises and work things out, then these communication skills can work. But if the person you're trying to communicate with does not respect you and they don't care about your needs or your well-being, then there's not a problem of communication, there's a problem of character. So an abusive person might try to exploit your empathy to manipulate you, and they might try to make their wants and their preferences seem like they're actually needs that you should be accommodating. But it's important to stand strong and don't diminish your needs for the wants of another person. Again, you can't out communicate an abuser into not being an abusive person. These are skills that work with people who are in good faith and people who want to make both of your lives better. And finally, I have a challenge for you all. It's a big block of text, but I want you to think of a challenge that or a conflict that you're having with in your life, whether that's with a client, family member, or friend. Now try to imagine what need that they're trying to have met in that conflict, and think about what need you're trying to have met. And think about all the emotions that have been involved in the conflict. Is there guilt, anxiety, frustration? How have those emotions affected the way that you've tried to resolve the conflict? And now imagine what it might look like if the next time you address the conflict, you started with empathy. State what you think they're feeling and what their needs are, and ask if you're correct. Give them an opportunity to elaborate or correct you, and then state your own feelings and your own needs, and why resolving this conflict is important to you, and let them know that you care about their needs and that you want to resolve the situation in a way that leaves both parties feeling okay. You don't necessarily have to go and do this, but just think about what that might look like in some of the conflicts in your life. And of course, if you are in a relationship where you don't feel safe, or if you're concerned about someone, you're not alone. If you're in immediate need or worried about someone you know, call our support line at 425-25-ABUSE or 425-252-2873. And I do want to announce, Laura, if you're still here, you have won a $25 gift card.
Yeah, we didn't announce that at the beginning, and that's my fault. Everyone who was here at this presentation today, sans DVS employees, was entered in to win a $25 gift card. Laura, you won today. Anyone who shows up next week or the following week to our presentations is also entered to win a $25 gift card. Laura, I messaged you in the chat, but just looking for an email and we'll take care of communication outside of this.
And if anyone has any other questions or comments or thoughts about today's webinar, go ahead and stick those in the chat, and I would love to talk more and answer them. Some sources that were used today. I would definitely 100% recommend Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. It is a very good book, and a lot of the concepts talked about today were straight from that book. And then in the meantime, I am going to subject you all to a nice song about communication that some of you have already heard if you came early. If it loads.
Before it starts, I do want to let you know that I have definitely received a complaint about DVS employees not being allowed in the drawing, and that complaint will be filed with all appropriate managements and dismissed very quickly. So thank you for reaching out. And thank you for, thank you for being open and forthcoming with your complaints.
Thank you, Chris.
I can talk about you. I can talk about you. I can talk about you, but when I do, I'm talking about you and the things you do. I can tell everybody what you're doing wrong or right. I can say you're bad or good, that you're doing what you shouldn't or should. I can talk about you, but when I do, I'm talking about me. I can talk about you. I can talk about you. I can talk about you, but when I do, I'm talking about me. When I talk about you, I'm talking about me. In a roundabout way, the things I say about you. Say what I like or don't. Say I'll take you as you are or I won't. I can talk about you, but it's true I'm talking about me. I can talk about you. I can talk about you. I can talk about you, but when I do, I'm talking about me.